Hi friends, in 2021 I released Woke the Movie, a film which drops viewers straight down the dark and twisted rabbit hole of internet conspiracies. And through the course of the film, we share much hard and dare I say damning evidence that a dark and surreal world lurks just outside of the view of most people. However, that evidence is not enough to get at the heart of what might be really going on. And where hard evidence is scarce, answers mostly come in the form of first-hand testimony from an often colorful group of people who claim to have personally experienced something out of this world. And there's obvious problems with this. For starters, with little to no physical evidence, it's hard to know whether those who have come forward with amazing tales are either intentionally lying or suffering from some form of high-functioning mental illness. However, it becomes very obvious that most of these whistleblowers, whether you think they're lying or not, are each telling a very small part of the same and very specific story. And if you barely believed anything I've showed you up to this point, you might want to get off now, because we're about to turn the batshit crazy meter up to 11, as we take a deep dive into the most insane shared worldview you'll ever hear. For the sake of brevity, I just want to focus on the overlapping accounts of a sample of 6 specific individuals. 6 whistleblowers who will serve as our guides to the bottom of an extremely freaky rabbit hole. And if it makes you stomach what's to come any easier, nothing you're about to hear is at all true. And with that said, let's bring on the crazy. First, a brief introduction. First up is William Tompkins, a real person with a detailed paper trail proving he is who he says he is. As a very bright child growing up in Southern California just before the Second World War, Tompkins attracted the attention of the US Navy for creating models of Navy ships from memory that were so detailed that they included a number of then classified features that the Navy didn't want known to the public. Tompkins was able to use his model building abilities to land a job with one of the US's largest aerospace corporations. And that's when things began to get weird.
I'm in there for only 4 weeks, and they put me into a secret lab.
This think tank was tasked with designing hundreds of theoretical military missions that would take place in space, as well as having to design a fleet of spacecraft necessary to carry them out.
The vehicles that we designed for all of these missions are massive. They're like 40 times the size of the little Apollo.
Where Tompkins attracts a lot of controversy is his claim that these military missions and spacecraft did become a reality in a classified space program ran by the Navy called Solar Warden.
It is 8 Navy space battle groups with destroyers, cruisers, all kinds of stuff.
According to Tompkins, he was able to get away with such disclosures with direct approval of the Navy admiral he worked under, who Tompkins believes belongs to a faction of the military elite who wants some of this information disclosed to the public. William Tompkins passed away in 2017 at the age of 94. Our next whistleblower, like William Tompkins, has many verifiable records backing up his identity. His name is Philip Schneider. Schneider was the son of a distinguished US Naval Intelligence Captain, Otto Oscar Schneider, who was instrumental in the design of nuclear submarines and helped the military test nuclear weapons in the South Pacific during the 40s. Phil was also a very bright child, who eventually became a geological scientist and structural engineer, and according to his claims, worked in the construction of very large underground military facilities. However, it's his claim that he worked on one particular underground base that would make him famous.
I was involved in something very controversial in building another base inside of Dulce, New Mexico, which is Los Alamos Laboratory. We built an underground facility, a better part of 3 cubic miles hollowed out underground.
Phil claims that in 1979, while excavating the base under Dulce, he was lowered into a cavern to check on some malfunctioning equipment, when he then stumbled upon a large active alien base within the Earth.
The large alien grays had been encamped there for, as best as believed possible, about 400 or 500 years. The stench was worse than the worst garbage can you can imagine. The entity was absolutely horrible. I didn't waste any time. I reached for my pistol. Well, that's when all the hell broke loose, really. All I remember is that he just kind of waved his hand in front of his chest, and the next thing I know, this blue beam hit me and just literally opened me up like a fish.
Schneider says he was saved by a Green Beret who ended up dying in the conflict. Whether you believe Phil or not, it does seem that he sustained permanent physical and psychological injuries. Here you can hear Cynthia Dreyer, the woman that he would marry years later, describe the damage Phil had suffered.
He did Dulce, New Mexico, where he was shot in the chest, and he had his leg bandaged from top to bottom. His memory is like totally lost as to what he did before. It wasn't until after we got married and stopped taking the medications he was taking when I first met him that he started to remember all of the things.
I'm breaking the law. I'm breaking world as well as federal law, coming out and even talking about this to a group of people. I love my country more than I love my life.
So, how was Phil able to get away with revealing such stunning top-secret information? Well, in 1996, Philip Schneider was found dead in his apartment with a rubber hose tied around his neck. His death was ruled a suicide by local authorities. If our next whistleblower's name sounds familiar, that's because she's the great-granddaughter of the 34th US President, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Now, I'm guessing his great-granddaughter Laura was kind of the black sheep of the Eisenhower family, especially after she went public to claim that there was an attempt by a secret shadowy group to recruit her to live on Mars?
In 2006, I was recruited to go off planet, and there was a lot of manipulation connected to it, so it wasn't, like a nice invitation done with respect. It had a lot to do with, control.
That control came in the form of a man she was romantically and emotionally involved with, whom she believes was sent to recruit her.
I would research and the names of the people that he was directly interfacing with. They had these cover careers and they were well respected in their field. After I told him I was not going to go, and he basically put it in the words of, they're going to kidnap you. But he tried to kind of soften it so I wouldn't get all panicked.
Now, why would anyone want to go to Mars? Well, according to her, breakaway factions of the US military-industrial complex are actually way more advanced in space travel than what is made public, and that we've actually had a colony on Mars for decades.
What are we talking about here? You're saying that there's actually a human colony that's been on Mars that's
People
existing now, not in the future, now.
Yeah, existing now.
Laura is also convinced that much of the technology that secretly got us to Mars was in part because her great-grandfather made treaties with an alien race known as the Greys. She also believes the handling of this extraterrestrial information was taken out of her great-grandfather's hands and placed in the control of uber-governmental organizations, some with not very positive intentions.
Eisenhower didn't trust them and so set up a unit in the U.S. Marine Corps, and he also warned us in his final speech.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex.
We need to understand what this agenda is about because it's connected to, ET government treaties and some of the things that were discussed in the 1950s, actually. So it goes on and on. If people really want to find out more, you need to Google people like Captain K. His real name is Randy Cramer.
Which brings us to our next whistleblower, Randy Cramer. Randy claims that he's a super soldier, a Marine to be exact, from the very same Marine Corps Special Sections unit that Laura Eisenhower says was set up by her great-grandfather. And he was then subjected to rather unusual forms of training and unusual missions.
The project was called Project Moonshadow. It was trying to not use trauma-based mind control. It was an attempt to create augmented soldiers without having to break them 100 times to make us more durable, because breaking soldiers again and again using trauma-based mind control makes them fragile.
So why should we believe him?
Impersonating an officer is a felony. Lying about duty stations or defrauding the public is a felony. And certainly the Marine Corps would give a crap, and I've been doing this for almost 3 years, and I haven't heard a word from them. If I were misrepresenting myself or lying, I would be committing a number of felonies.
That's an interesting point to keep in mind. That's because Randy claims that he spent 17 years of active duty defending a colony on Mars as part of an elite outfit. So why would such a colony need military protection? Well, according to Randy, Mars is home to two main intelligent species. A group called the Mantids that he describes as being similar to ants and operated on a hive mind, and a group of intelligent reptoids.
My understanding is the indigenous insectoids arrived there some hundreds of thousands of years ago, so they've been there for a really, really long time, but they're not evolved from there. But the reptoids are an evolved species that evolved from lesser rock lizards.
Cramer goes on to describe how the two species were once in bitter conflict over domination of the planet, which used to be full of life and very similar to Earth. That is until a large nuclear-type weapon destroyed the planet, blowing its atmosphere and most of its water into space, and leaving its survivors in a near-primitive state. And despite such destruction, he says the planet is teeming with biological life.
The equatorial region, which I've only been to a couple of times, has some bigger animals, But where we were, which was much farther north, everything was very small. So little birds, little lizards, little, burrowing rodents, mammals. But as soon as you get underground, things can get a little bigger.
Sounds crazy, right? His story is outrageous. But there is a trickle of evidence coming from official space agencies that seem to back up some of Randy's claims. Aside from what looks like toppled ruins, space agencies have published photos of structures that very much resemble walls and crashed craft. If these images are genuine, which official agencies don't dispute that they are, then there appears to be a lot going on our closest neighbor that's very intriguing indeed. Now, if Randy Cramer was a secret super soldier who avoided the trauma-based mind control as part of his training, then our next whistleblower was one of those so-called super soldiers who wasn't so lucky. His name is Max Spiers. Max claims to have been involved since birth in a subprogram of the Montauk Project. The program, named Project Oak Tree, was tasked to create programmable mind control super soldiers by artificially inducing split personality disorder.
When the mind is fractured through trauma, whether it is sexual trauma, whether it is physical trauma, violence, the mind fractures itself and creates an amnesiac barrier around that so that you don't have to keep reliving the experience over and over again.
If you're taught, you're then able to go inside there and then program a new person to do anything, to do absolutely anything.
This technique, according to Max, has been around since the Egyptians, but was scientifically perfected by the Nazis before the end of World War II, as well as after when their scientists were involved in US military projects. But since its roots are much older, Max says the recruits are often chosen based on their bloodline.
My family goes back, and for the last certainly 100 years, we're all involved in the occult. On my father's side, he's a descendant from Charlemagne. For these specific bloodlines and these breeding bloodlines, they have to take a child before the age of 3.
And so Max was fucked with royally. But his programming began to break down in his early 30s. Max also says that this type of mind control is common, and that there are many public examples of this programming breaking down over time.
I feel a little shaky. Oh no, no, wrong with me. No, it's good. No, it's good. You go. It's good.
Lectures of Max's story are widely available online and are very interesting, not only because of his personal story, but also because some of the strange things he says on a whole slew of topics, such as Colonel Sanders.
The man who was behind KFC, he was also a master programmer, handler, slave handler.
And why you shouldn't eat pork.
The domesticated pig is disturbingly a cross between a human and a wild boar, and consuming it is basically cannibalism in a way.
If you're willing to believe Max, his information is quite explosive. But if he was telling the truth, how was he able to get away with disseminating it to millions? Just before he was scheduled to give a lecture in Poland, Max, at the age of 39, died suddenly in his Warsaw apartment. Max's mother believes that foul play was involved, although authorities refused to investigate any further.
The roads lead all over the place to places that I never ever thought that I would go to, and it's a very mysterious and frightening world that I've stepped into.
Our final whistleblower's name is Alex Collier, and ever since he was a child, he claims to have been in psychic and physical contact with a race of highly evolved and benevolent extraterrestrials, known as the Andromedans.
As far as the Andromedan culture, their society would be approximately 4,700 years more advanced than ours. On a spiritual level, on a technological level, they're 50,000 years.
Alex says the Andromedans contacted him because they were not happy with the evolutionary direction that humans were heading. And he wasn't the only one.
There are also other people who are mediums or channels who are also getting information on a spiritual level.
And so Alex was chosen to help elevate humanity's collective consciousness, which is under threat of multiple parasitic races of alien entities that are attempting to dominate us from the shadows. Maybe that's why he's so intense.
You are not coming into my head, you are not taking me over, and you are not going to violate my free will. I don't give a damn who you are. Leave me alone.
However, it's not these whistleblowers' accounts that are the most important. It's how specific details combine into one of the most craziest stories you'll ever hear. And to find out more, you have to subscribe to this channel. Or better yet, watch Woke the movie in its entirety, which is available now. Sleep tight, friends.